Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Steve Varmusa with GrayMatter Systems. On the line with me today is Bill Weed, and really excited to have you guys today. We've been working with a number of our clients around cybersecurity, and coming from last year, to give everybody a little bit of a primer, the biggest topic that people asked us to talk about was cybersecurity, specifically for operational technology. So today's focus is around that core competency of how to accelerate time to protection. And with me today is Bill Weed, and Bill's one of our cybersecurity experts. He's been in the trenches with me and the rest of the GrayMatter team, really trying to fight the cyber giant. And quite a few people that I recognize their names, and some new folks. So for the folks that I haven't met yet, to give you a little bit of perspective of Bill and I, Bill and I started our careers in the OT space before OT was cool. It was back when the 486 was the microprocessor and 25 megahertz was the speed of our computers. And when we talked about cybersecurity, it was when we got an email from a friend of ours and they told us that they loved us. And when we opened it, well, magically it looked at all of our address books and sent out an email to everybody saying that we love them too. And that was the extent of what we thought cybersecurity was. How far would we come? You know, now we're talking about ransomware and holding companies hostage, all with a piece of code. So really excited. One of the things that everybody's been talking about is how do we accelerate time to protection? And one of the things coming out of last seminar was we really wanted to bring Bill back and ask him some more questions. So this is really informal. This is really our way of trying to share with you a lot of the questions that we typically hear from you. And this is really an event focused on how to help you accelerate your cybersecurity efforts and goals. And with that, to give you a little bit of perspective, we'd like to share kind of how we got to where we are today and share with you a little bit about the webinars we've done in the past, and then share with you a little perspective of the field. So some of the things that we're hearing from our clients and from you around what's happening in the cybersecurity space. We also really want you to lean in a little bit and pay attention to really an innovative way of how we're approaching accelerating cybersecurity. So some of it will be with concepts and ideas and tools that you're familiar with, but we've really been working with a lot of our thought-leading clients on how to accelerate these concepts and ideas and leverage the technology tools. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions, but I'm really excited to have our expert Bill with us to help you understand the how behind we're going to do that. So we'll share with you a little perspective of the field, what this accelerated time to protection looks like, and the methodology that we've put together from a GrayMatter perspective, leveraging our 25 years in the OT space, and working with our clients and how we're helping them accelerate that, and ask Bill to give us some context behind that. So with that, let's get started. So to give you a little perspective of one of our webinars before, so we really focused on the front door of IT. You know, we've done a great job investing in IT technology, but our real vulnerability is in the OT space, realistically creating an open back window for vulnerabilities to come into, and why the IT tools and technologies really are leaving it vulnerable. The second thing you asked about was, hey, is this really just a technology problem? And what we found out was it's really an enterprise problem. And we really helped to share what some of the industry-leading companies are doing around not just looking at it as a technology problem, but how do we bring the other parts of the organization and help them recognize their role in solving the cybersecurity problem, and how that can help unlock some of the budgets that's needed in order to remediate the issues that we're facing today. Which really brings us to today, which was all about how do we speed protection? Folks are making the investments, but how do we more rapidly speed protection for the OT devices, those process control systems? Well, it's a big problem, and it continues to get bigger. It's really a cyber giant, you know, and we only have limited time limited amount of staff with the expertise and limited amount of money to go after it. We're seeing a lot of vulnerabilities. Folks are saying, gosh, we're getting emails on a daily basis from our control vendors telling us about what new vulnerabilities they're finding in the environments today. We're still not given the amount of resources we really need to tackle the problem, and we're just seeing more and more threats come after us. We know we are getting some money, but we still don't have the budget available to really go after and implement the strategies and architectures that we're hearing are best practice. We're starting to see more threats come after us, and they're transforming the way that they're coming at our factories. Literally, there was a glue manufacturer a couple months ago that got a threat, and they were a result of ransomware that literally locked up their operation. And it's these same threats that are evolving and using bots and new technologies for trying to get into our system. We're seeing industry compliance. So folks asking us to be compliant on the OT space and have a strategy for OT cybersecurity. People compliance. We're educating our people, but we still know that they're going out in the environment connecting devices, whether it be USB to charge your phones, or hey, I can more rapidly go to Best Buy and grab a wireless router. So the problem's only getting bigger and the giant's getting bigger. And I wish I had everything was all great news, but unfortunately there's quite a bit of bad news, right? And bad news is, the teams that we have are always going to be too small. It's always going to take us months to execute using the traditional approaches that we've been utilizing in the past. And we're going to continue to have a limited set of domain expertise to be able to solve it. What we're finding and what we're seeing from our clients is it takes a very specific skill set to solve the OT cybersecurity problem. It's somebody that not only understands the process control devices that are in the field, but also understands networking and IT side of the house, to know how all these things come together and how to secure the boundaries. And that's a very specific skill set that not a lot of people possess. And even if we added more people, the space is continuing to evolve, new vulnerabilities are found. We just will never be able to have enough people to attack the cyber giant. And a couple of things that we're hearing from the field are, hey, I am getting all these new vulnerabilities. We're getting emails on a daily basis, but do these vulnerabilities apply to me? Do I need to pay attention to them? Do I have that device in my environment that I should go remediate or not? I don't know. As I'm trying to re-architect my systems, I see how things are communicating today, but should they communicate? Did we only do that back in the day and we've just added more complexity and more communications, but do I really need those two systems to communicate today? Part of the other struggle is we are getting a lot of recommendations and suggestions on what the new security approaches and architectures should be, but it's costing more like 2 to 3 times the cost, and definitely taking at least twice as long to implement those same approaches. And even though we're doing all of this work, am I balancing the right amount of risk with investment? And more importantly, with all of this work in front of us, we're going to need more time. So how do I more rapidly secure those operations? So there is a little bit of bright spot in all this, and there is some good news. That thinking about leveraging the technologies and approaches that a lot of us are familiar with, you can truly multiply your team. And what I ask you here is, we've got some really novel concepts and an approach that a lot of our customers are working with us on to help them accelerate their own protection. And I ask you to really ask Bill and I questions along the way. This is really for you, to help you understand how some of these new approaches can help you multiply your team and get in front of that cyber giant. 2 ways that we can help you on the good news side is really giving you an instant risk assessment of those OT vulnerabilities so that it doesn't take 2 or 3 months to do all of the interviews with people and collecting spreadsheets, but literally within a day help you get an instant risk assessment of what your OT environment looks like. And I'll be asking Bill to provide us more context of how that happens. The second piece is a rapid security approach to how can we more rapidly secure the boundaries of our factories, and how can we leverage technology in a new way to help us get there. And this is the part that I really challenge you to lean in on Bill and I and ask us questions, because it is a new way of thinking of things that we're finding is really a way to help folks rapidly secure their operational technologies in their factories. And probably even better news is that even though we're talking about this new approach, it's less expensive than the traditional approach that you're familiar with. It's a faster solution to deploy, so we can get you there quicker and give you more breathing room to implement the policies, procedures, and strategies that you want to put in place. And thirdly, it's really easy to maintain, and Bill provide more information around how that is, but this allows us to reduce the total cost of ownership so the folks that we actually have in operations can support it without having to know as much things about policies and scripting around a lot of the traditional devices on securing networks today. So the way we think about this is a way to baseline your operation. So how can we rapidly provide you a baseline of what devices do you have out in the field? What's the prioritized vulnerability? So what are the things I need to go focus on first? How are things connected? What's that map of everything? And then based on that, what's the most likely path that an attacker might take to exploit all those vulnerabilities? And how far down in the network can they get so that I can do an idea of how to align my risk with that investment. The second piece to that is how can you rapidly secure your boundaries. So what this phase of our process is about is helping you get some breathing room. So how do we quickly make the factories invisible to the network so that folks can't see them to try to attack them? How do we harden remote access so as people are coming into the factories, how do we make sure it's the right person, the information that they're sharing is encrypted so that they aren't exposing it to the outside world? And how are we making sure that when they are connected in, they're only seeing the devices and the information we want them to see? So how can we quickly put a shell around those factories? What that allows us to do is then take some time to harden that boundaries. Now we can focus on further segmentation of our network, be able to then figure out how to secure your Windows vulnerability. So those systems that are working on still Windows 2000 or Windows XP that we still need to run our plants and our processes, how can we better secure and harden those Windows systems so it reduces their overall vulnerability? Moving on to the fourth part of the process is really becoming proactive. So getting out in front of that cyber giant. And that really allows us to do a couple of really great things. So this allows us to network fingerprint. What that means is now we can remove the risk to zero-day vulnerabilities. We can start doing software assessments. So as you bring in new HMI tools or new manufacturing execution system tools into the environment, assess those vulnerabilities of that software. And what folks are seeing that as an ability to do is reduce the cyber insurance premiums that they have. We're also going to be able to detect new devices. So if you do have people going out in the field, going to Best Buy, buying a switch or a wireless router, be able to detect that, hey, that new device is on the network. And maybe even better than that, as you're adding new devices or folks are putting real devices onto the network, the PLCs, the HMIs, you don't have to go out in the field and do another assessment. Literally, all you would have to do is go to the dashboard. It'll show you that the new device is connected, what it is, and assess whether or not any threats there are. And then further on, we're going to be able to provide you with a risk scorecard. And what this is going to allow you to do is, based on the investments that you're making, am I really reducing my overall risk and threat landscape? And again, that's what lots of folks are utilizing to help reduce their insurance premiums around cybersecurity. So with that, I'd really like to transition over to Bill. And Bill, if you could help me explain to the folks on the webinar a little bit more context around how we are accelerating the digital inventory and that baseline.
Sure. So thank you, Steve, and thank you for everyone for attending. So Steve was mentioning that our goal of what we're trying to do is shorten the effort surrounding cybersecurity, and that's going to start with creating a digital inventory. And among the tools that we have is one that, although it can do several things, as we'll talk about, one of the starting points for it is it can quickly and automatically generate a graphical view and a detailed document of your OT assets. So it's going to provide sort of that graphic drawing of all the assets on your OT network as well as the detailed listing. So the idea is we're trying to have something that's a little bit more comprehensive as an asset list, as opposed to just a spreadsheet with computer names and addresses and ink marks and changes that we often see at a lot of our customer sites. So it does this simply through listening to your OT network and any of the conversations it can hear between devices. It's going to build that asset model for you. And after it's been able to do that, then we can start to begin identifying and prioritizing our vulnerabilities. So, once we have that inventory in place, we can now use that same tool to start initiating work on assessing our threats and vulnerabilities. And one of the things to keep in mind is the things we're talking about are designed specifically for OT, and you need to keep in mind that the threats and the vulnerabilities for devices on the OT network are not necessarily the same as those on the IP network. As our industrial networks and processors are set up, they're not necessarily running Microsoft operating systems. They're not normally using protocols that you see in an office-type environment. So we need to have tools available to us that can actually look at and assess vulnerabilities within an OT setting. Once we have that, it will also help us start mitigating our threat vectors. And of course, our threat vectors is our vulnerability path. As we have an end device, exactly how can that end device be exploited and what has to happen in order for that exploitation to occur? Because we're not trying to shut down the entire path or vector. What we need to know is what parts of that path or vector are going to be the most efficient for us to address, so we can start having protection right away for our various endpoints. So once we have this digital inventory, our ability to assess our vulnerabilities, to mitigate some of those threats, it's going to allow us to align the identified risks with the goals of our organization's cybersecurity process, right? And cybersecurity is going to be a process, right? There is no single installation that's going to give us complete security. It's something that's going to have to be ongoing, and it's going to be something that we're going to create a system that includes defense in depth. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So finally, it's going to also allow us to determine how to allocate those limited resources to start addressing all of these challenges of mitigating our risks and our threats within our OT system. So the idea being that from the cybersecurity framework that's provided by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, provides a set of activities, right? As you're trying to achieve your cybersecurity goals, the first three activities become that identify, protect, and detect. So after we've done the identification phase, the tools that we're using can also help us address in protecting our assets through the use of safeguards, as well as being able to detect cybersecurity events so that we can address those. And through that, we need to establish a baseline. So for our rapid baseline, what we're going to do is we'll take a look at a scaled down document that gets generated by one of our cybersecurity tools that sort of provides an outline of the protection methods for the OT systems that we have. And so as we're looking at this, what we have first, as I said, this is kind of scaled down to keep it in the time frame of our webinar. First thing we're looking at is a vulnerability assessment score. It's kind of rating what our current vulnerabilities are. It's showing us the idea of the devices that are vulnerable, the devices that are protected, and those devices that need improvement, as well as a quick summary of what's been detected that's significant within our OT network. Internet connections, firewall rules that are vulnerable, connections between internal networks, these types of things. So that if any of these represent threats to us, we're able to look at that, evaluate, and deal with them. The next thing that we're looking at is our asset discovery. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, is the idea that we have a tool that can go out and through listening to the OT network, it can develop and show graphically the devices that we have. And this is all done automatically as it's listening to our network. Completely passive. We're not introducing any traffic or anything onto our network to disrupt our operations, but rather it's able to listen and identify all the devices that are within our network. In addition to a list view, which can also be generated, it gives us this graphical view to be able to look at the devices, and it can show us which devices are protected, which are at risk, as well as any events that may have occurred within our network. Now, this example that we're showing is relatively small. It's only about 30 devices. Realistically, as we're going to deploy this within our customer bases, we're going to be looking at hundreds and hundreds of devices. And as it does this, it's something that occurs very quickly. This isn't something that's going to take weeks or days to generate. When we bring in this tool and get this connected, within a matter of minutes, we're already detecting devices. And in fact, at some of our customer sites, we've been able to quickly see from up to the biggest I think I've had immediately has been about 670 at one of the last deployments.
Hey, Bill?
Sure.
Is this something that you and your team actually draw on, like AutoCAD or PowerPoint or anything like that?
Nope. This is automatically generated. So as the tool listens, this is something it'll actually put together. And as I said, this one is automatically generated. It's put up the graphics there. It's now put in a PDF format that we can share with other folks on our team, as well as the ability then to get a document list that contains all this information as well.
And I can do all of this just by listening on the wire? Did I hear
Correct.
that correctly?
Correct. No introduction of traffic, nothing that's going to in any way impede the operations of our OT network. Everything that it hears, it'll be recorded, and we'll be able to see it. Where that becomes important too is as we have devices added to our network, either through expansions to our process or through contractors, vendors, other folks who occasionally have to get onto the network to perform maintenance or upgrade functions, all of those will be detected and recorded for us so that we can observe and see them in place.
Nice.
Second part is there'll be a listing of all the devices that we see. So obviously we had to break this down. Even for 30, it would be rather long. You can imagine as we have it out on a network that has hundreds of devices. But I show this one simply as a PLC as that reminder as we look at that is that the common vulnerabilities and exposures within the OT realm are a little bit different. And so we have to keep in mind of the vulnerabilities of the PLCs, which isn't going to be the same as a Windows machine. And those vulnerabilities are also going to be dependent on the firmware that's in place on that PLC. So it's something that has to be tracked and known for us to address any threat vectors that may be in place that could represent a risk to this particular device.
And is this Rockwell specific, or can we have other control systems vendors there as well?
Ultimately, it has multiple control system vendors. At this point, we don't have everyone. It's going to be the most common ones, but the tool, in addition to understanding your devices, the other thing that it's able to detect and listen to is your industrial protocols as well. Things like Modbus, Ethernet IP, DNP3, a variety of your common industrial protocols, it's also monitoring as well down at the packet level. So it allows us great visibility to see what's going on in our OT network. It'll also generate for us these attack vectors. As we said, this is sort of our path that a threat would need to exploit to get to our end devices. So if we're trying to protect our more critical assets, for instance, our PLC that might be controlling our process, this is the path that would have to be taken or could be taken to exploit that PLC. And again, the idea isn't necessarily to immediately try to stop each and every one of these exploits along the path. The idea is, in order to protect our device, what we want to do is at least close one of those windows so that the end device can't be accessed. Ultimately, we may wish to address all of them. We may not be able to, depending on what the particular vulnerability is, but at least we can know what's there. We know what we can address such that we ensure more security for our device. And so for any device that is at risk, our tools that we have are able to verify and generate these attack vectors for us. And finally,
I think what you've told me before is this is where it kind of identifies what the most vulnerable entry point would be, and how it would exploit all those vulnerabilities down to that bottom device. Is that true?
Correct. So each of those points represents a vulnerability in those devices. So again, it's not that we have to address each and every device. It's just that we have to address something along the path if we want to secure that particular attack vector to the device. And if there are multiple attack vectors, it will show us multiple attack vectors. The final thing that will provide us, and this also becomes important as we're trying to plan our resource availability and access, is mitigation. That is what we want to try and do to improve the vulnerability score. And the idea is that we're not trying to do this to improve the score of our document necessarily. It's trying to provide us an idea of, hey, these are the things that can be done that are going to improve the security of our network. So it kind of becomes that checklist that we can then prioritize based on the threats and the risks that we see within our systems. So it actually gives us a more structured approach as opposed to having to do tons of legwork going out to all of our devices, trying to figure out what potential vulnerability is in each and every device, compile those lists, and then bring that back to a team to start then trying to say, hey, how should we start addressing each of these things? It gives us that list automatically of how we can start improving the security of our systems.
Hey, Bill, so I'm familiar with the traditional approach of, going out and asking questions and filling in spreadsheets, and, that typically takes, 2 months to compile. Can you give us a sense for how long it takes your team from the time they go on site to be able to provide this kind of information?
Sure, and the answer is literally minutes. Once we're on site, it's simply a matter of setting up the tool, getting it configured and activated, and there is virtually no configuration involved other than adding some users and passwords for people that need to access and manage the I'll call it the appliance for lack of a better term. But in order to listen and monitor the systems, it's up and running, and as soon as it's listening, it's detecting devices. And we've literally put that in the different industries and had 90% of the devices there within just 10 minutes. And within 15 minutes, we've gotten virtually all the devices. It's simply a matter of, as long as the devices are communicating, you can hear them. And then if there's anything additional that later comes online, it'll pick that up and add that to our list of assets as well.
Interesting. And I think you were sharing with me that you were getting ready to go on site with a client that felt pretty good about his security of his OT environment, to the fact that I think he actually had told you he was how much devices he had, and basically he was air-gapped and there was going to be no issue. Do you have a sense for what happened after that?
Yeah, this was one of the more interesting ones, and in some ways one of the more valuable, at least for our clients, because as always we want to try and have an idea of what to expect in terms of devices and the networks that we're going to be listening to, and they were expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 devices on their OT network. And as you mentioned, it was air-gapped, so they felt pretty confident that it was secured, and within minutes, what we were able to see was the idea that no, they've got closer to 140, 150 devices on their network, and in fact, at least 3 of those devices were actively communicating with the internet. So although that wasn't the news they wanted, it was actually critical news for them to have, because there was no other way. At this point, they weren't assuming that was a possibility, and the only way they were going to be able to discover that was actually to go, again, device by device during some sort of assessment and test and verify. And in this case, within minutes, they were able to see those devices, address it, see those devices, see what they were doing, and then quickly address those particular vulnerabilities within their system to eliminate them, because obviously those were ones that would be considered really critical.
Nice, thanks. So
sure.
With that, we wanted to transition a little bit into the next phase. So once we've got a good baseline and understand where the vulnerabilities are and the prioritized risks that we should go after, the next piece is really around how can we secure those boundaries. So Bill, can you share with us a little bit more about how we can rapidly secure the boundaries around our OT systems?
Sure. And in this case, we're going to be talking about a different tool that's at our disposal that we can use. And so, you know, before I start talking about that, I can say that I'm sure everyone listening has already done work and has secured boundaries within their system. I don't think that's a surprise. I'm sure everyone's got firewalls and other systems within there, within their systems. So as we're talking about this, what we're suggesting, what we're talking about isn't to replace your existing systems. What you need to really have a secure system is have your layers of defense. What we're really talking about, or what we're really suggesting, is the idea of augmenting your systems and being able to augment them in a very efficient manner that's then also going to allow you to address and look at your OT system as a whole or holistically. Because again, cybersecurity being a process, and as you have your OT network, you're continually going to be wanting to add layers of security and try and secure different devices as you find vulnerabilities. What we're offering and suggesting is methods to quickly get some security in place so that you have time to focus and make plans for those sorts of activities. Because ultimately, that's one of the biggest challenges facing our organizations, right? As they're trying to set up and segment and work on their networks and create zones and conduits to be able to have more control and make their systems more secure, it's also something in order to do that correctly and plan for process expansions and to plan for how that's going to be used in the future. It's going to be something that's going to take a little rigorous effort, a little planning. And it's going to be a little bit time consuming because it's not something that one person is going to do, and it's probably going to involve a few folks. So in the meantime, what we want to do is give you the confidence that your system and your network is secure. So how we're doing that and sort of where we're going with that is your ability to harden that security within your boundaries. And so in augmenting your systems and trying to harden that security, what we want to do is we use the term micro or secure segmentation. So obviously network segmentation is something you already have in place. It's something that you definitely want to continue to have in place. But we've got our tools that can allow us to do this in a very quick manner, and it will also allow us to not only secure the networks, but able to better monitor compliance. That is, to be able to better monitor which devices are communicating, and ensuring that only the devices that are supposed to communicate with each other and the only devices that are supposed to communicate with each other only have the ability to, and no other devices. So it's sort of the least privilege approach in making sure that we don't have devices that don't need to communicate to PLCs communicating with them, or to SCADA nodes, or vice versa. And finally, we're also trying to limit Windows vulnerabilities. I mean, within any Windows systems, you're always going to have vulnerabilities that are inherent to the Windows system. So this is another way that we can help limit those those vulnerabilities within your OT network.
Thanks, Bill. And I just wanted to share with folks on the webinar a little bit that this is where I'm really going to ask you to lean in a little bit, because we're going to challenge some of your preconceived notions about how to rapidly segment for OT side of the network. And Bill's going to walk us through some of the key concepts around it. And I know it's a slide, but as you can imagine, in our webinar environment, it's difficult for us to be able to show you a live environment. So I'm going to ask you to give us a little poetic license, but that doesn't mean don't ask us questions, because this is really at the crux of how we can help you accelerate protection. And it's important that we help you understand some of these key concepts. And Bill will do that. So please, this is your time to ask us as much questions as you can to help you understand what this new approach is. So with that, Bill, can you walk us through? Because the way that I remember we had shared this with one of our other clients was really looking at this as a way to rapidly segment and protect those lines, and how that changes as you come into the plant environment.
Yep. So you can kind of view this as a sort of a generic document, right? We're trying to have the generic sort of setting where we have our corporate network, our firewall, which is, as we talk about locking the front door, that's one of our main areas of control and security is for your folks, and usually from an IT standpoint where you've built very strong firewalls to limit the access and security into your SCADA and control networks, or in essence your OT systems, going on to your SCADA monitoring, or including a routed LAN, a wide area network, as we'll talk about in a second for reasons that you may or may not have that in your systems, but that's there as we want to start talking about remote access as well. And then finally connections out either within your factory to different production lines, or this even could be to different factories in different locations. So as we're kind of putting this up here, what we're going to be doing and talking about is creating virtual private LAN services, not virtual private networks, not VPNs, but virtual private LAN services. In essence, we're going to be creating tunnels or private overlays on the existing infrastructure. So what that's going to do is that's going to hide and encrypt the communications from over the networks that these overlays or that it's being traversed by these overlays. So in this way, what we're doing is we're securing all the devices that need to communicate within our OT system. And what this is going to do is a couple things. One, it's going to allow you to continue to focus a lot of your resources sort of on the front door part of your protection, because that's, again, an integral and important part of it. But it's also going to give you time and let you start thinking about how you may want to start organizing and setting up your systems on your OT network. Because many times these have been in existence for a while. Depending what the state is of your OT network, you may have already started deploying or using virtual LANs. These may be physical LANs, a combination of both, or in some cases, as we've seen within systems, is different, or within customers, within some systems, they're actually were using the same IP addresses. And obviously that's not something you could then just start connecting and introducing into a normal network that would cause all sorts of conflicts, collisions, and other issues. However, what we're suggesting is something that's actually going to be able to deal with and address that situation, because it's going to, in essence, isolate and provide these private overlays. So we're going to give you time to, first, by protecting your network, to give you time to start doing, as I mentioned earlier, that planning and concepts of, hey, how do we ultimately want to design our network as a whole for it to work?
Hey, Bill. So,
yep.
Like, I got the understanding a little bit, but I guess I'm struggling with one thing. Like, what's the secret? Like, what's the thing that's really different? What's that secret?
Well, the secret of what we're really doing is we're going to, using the tools that are available to us, what we're going to do is we're going to manage trust between our devices, not just putting in firewalls, but we're going to be managing trust. Let's take a look at the next graphic. Let me move forward here, and I'll kind of show you what we've got set up. And so we're using, and the part of that is we're talking about the HIV Tunnels, which is really host identification protocol. And so by utilizing these tunnels or private overlays, what we're doing is we're decoupling the identity of our devices from the IP address, right? So where this starts becoming different is we're managing the trust. We're not just putting firewalls in place to just manage the traffic between sets of devices. What we're really doing is managing the trust between devices to be able to allow us access into the various areas. And by decoupling, that's where I was talking about the idea of you're able then to, in this case, we were showing that example of having duplicate IP addresses on your OT lines, on your lines out in your factory. but also the idea of as you're going to make future improvements or designs or changes within your OT system, what you're implementing in terms of these tunnels isn't going to affect those plans or those designs, because it's going to be very easy for these to adapt to any of those changes, because again, we're decoupling that IP address from the device.
So can I ask you one more question? So
sure.
When you and I were at a different factory, and he had mentioned to us that they have islands of automation basically on purpose because they wanted to keep standard, and that's why they weren't able to bridge them together, because they had the same IP address. So is that ability to decouple the identity from the IP address the reason why we were able to not only on-ramp that island of information, but also allow them to coexist and pass information back and forth, was because of that decoupling the identity?
Exactly, and that's exactly the reason. And so if you can think of it from that same customer's point of view, once you can have that security in place, now you've got time to start making your plans, setting up your resources, and start doing your scheduling as you want to start making network changes within those different lines. Because that can become a real problem if you're trying to do that quickly. Certainly the last thing you want to do is affect or deter any production environment. So that's exactly why it can allow us to be able to have the same IP addresses. Not that that's what we're recommending. It's just the easiest way as an example to help folks understand that, yeah, we're decoupling that IP address from the identity of the device. So along with that, one of the other things that we're kind of showing here is on this slide is the field text and your sort of their connections into the routed wide area network. And this is sort of to hint at the idea of remote access and being able to harden your remote access. For any of the folks that are online that are listening, if they're utilizing and leveraging remote access, I'm sure they've set up VPNs for people to be able to connect in remotely over the general internet, that is unsecure networks, to be able to come in, and what you're really doing is you're VPNing into a specific location and device on your corporate network. And again, don't need to get rid of those VPNs, but in leveraging this technology, what we're actually offering is by setting up also a relay device within your corporate network is to secure the communications completely end-to-end. That is, we're not just moving into your corporate network, we're actually securing the information, the communication from the device that's connecting over the internet all the way to your endpoint or your end device that needs to be controlled or acted upon. So it's another way.
Bill, can I ask you a quick question? So what I'm most familiar with is, managing the policies and the configurations of all of the kind of what I call the head-end devices. Those things either coming into the plant or coming into the line, the firewalls and the like. So given that as my backdrop of what I would have to maintain, how do I configure that here? And how is that different?
Thank you. I was forgetting that point. And if we look on the slide, we have something labeled Conductor, and the idea is this is your central management point to configure and manage that decoupling and the communication between your devices. So as you're entering in your HIP settings for the devices that you will want to allow communication between, it's as simple literally as, after you've got your devices entered, it's just drawing a line between the devices to allow them to communicate to each other. And in this way, you've got a central management point to control and manage communication to devices, as well as to make any changes or additions that may occur as your OT network expands or changes. So again, we don't need to re-architect or make any changes right away, but we've got a centralized management point, and we're not suggesting that you, again, should avoid the use of firewalls out into your OT network. Just this provides a quick and efficient method to set this up and to manage these, as opposed to having to go out and manage policies and rules on a device-by-device setting, as well as needing people that understand how you're going to set up those different firewalls. You may have already standardized on using specific firewalls, but if not, what we've seen at some customer sites is they've got different individuals who specialize in different types of equipment. So as a result, it's going to be their availability to tweak, to adjust, and to make changes to some of the firewall policies and rules that are in place.
Gotcha. So this is how, when you and I, after we had implemented at one of the municipalities, this is where he was saying he's refocusing his team. I think it was like 3 guys, instead of looking at the process side, which is the right hand of your graphic, to really putting all of his effort and thought into how do I continue to secure the entry points in, is because we've encrypted those communications to those factories, essentially making them invisible. And now, since that threat's reduced, he's able to focus on the firewalls and the entry points kind of coming into the factory. Is that about right?
Yep, and realistically, that's going to be one of their biggest responsibilities, is to make sure that that entry point or that front door is completely secured, it's monitored, it's audited, it's adjusted. So again, that's one of those, that's always going to be a task that's going to have to be dealt with. And we're trying to implement and have tools and a system in place where you can feel comfortable with the security that is in place on the OT network, and again, have your time for planning to be able to augment that, and then add additional layers of security and safeguards within your system as time, money, and schedule allows.
I really liked the way one of our treatment supervisors framed this up. I think it helps paint the picture, especially for his remote access people. You know, what he had told us was, you know, I've got a VPN access, I've got folks coming in by a VPN, you know, does it matter? And after we put the system in and he started working with it for a while, I thought it was very interesting that he had said it's almost like, if you think about this as a security system to your house, your VPN allows you to enter the front door. So today, with a traditional VPN, once you're in the front door, you can go to the living room, you can go to the kitchen, you can go upstairs, you can go to the basement, you can do whatever you want. But after putting this in place, you could get to the door through the VPN, but you were only limited to the entryway. And unless somebody had the access or the trust to be able to go to the living room or to the kitchen, he could more tightly segment how that person moved throughout his network. So I thought that was very interesting. And I also wanted to acknowledge we've been getting a lot of questions coming in through the chat line, and I absolutely appreciate those. We're going to be getting to a couple of them here. I know Bill has a couple of other concepts that he wanted to share with you. Probably, honestly, not going to get to them all. As you guys know, this is a hot topic, but I promise we're going to respond to all of them. You'll probably be getting at least an email or a phone call from Bill or I, but I just wanted to acknowledge, appreciate everybody's excitement and enthusiasm about the topic, and we'll be getting to some of those questions shortly. Hey, Bill, other than what we were talking about around securing remote access, was there anything else you wanted to make sure that we discussed?
I talked about decoupling and actually the managing of trust, as well as your single point of management. So again, it's something that affords quick, efficient protection, and is going to be able to easily adapt to whatever is going to change or occur in terms of how you're managing and occurring your configuring your networks.
Perfect.
So, okay.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks. And really, I know this really forces everybody to think about things differently. So this is truly a way that we can help you accelerate the protection of those OT environments. And happy to have more follow-up conversations. We'll get into some of the questions here shortly. But I also wanted to share with you what the next phase of the process. So as we came in, we provided you that baseline. We rapidly secured the borders around those factories, gave us some time to further segment. In phase 4, this is where we really get out in front of that cyber giant. It allows us to think offensively about how do we go about securing our environment and attacking the cyber giant. So Bill, can you share with us in phase 4 some of the capabilities that we can deliver in this step of the process?
Sure, and you can see we're kind of titling this play offense, and really it goes back to one of your previous slides about being proactive and how we're trying to address security. So within these tools, one of the things that is getting generated is your network fingerprint. And by fingerprint, what we mean is it's giving you visibility to see what's actually going on within your network, even if your network's secured. It's still important to know what's taking place within that network in terms of the types of communications, the devices that are communicating, and the simple example I give you is that, ultimately, an isolated system didn't stop Stuxnet worm. It wasn't until people actually started investigating and looking in depth of what was going on in the network that was able to be discovered. So the idea of just securing around those boundaries isn't necessarily going to be enough, or shouldn't necessarily be enough, to say, okay, then everything's set. We also want to be able to have, and we can provide tools that give you visibility into what's actually taking place within your OT network. In addition, that also kind of helps us assess how our software systems are behaving, right? So that we can see that the proper commands and communications are taking place between our systems. And finally, the ability to detect new devices. And I mentioned earlier, not only will that be authorized devices based on expanding within your process, but the fact that you may have folks who have to come in and occasionally work on your network in terms of maintenance, upgrades, those types of things. And you want to know and have records of when those were occurring to make sure that the expected folks were online, doing the things you expected them to do, connecting to the devices you expected them to connect to, as well as doing it at the time you expected them to be doing it. So being able to have the records of all those things is going to be important for you to keep track of what's actually taking place within your network. And so another part of that playing offense is our ability to deal with regulatory changes. So in addressing regulatory changes, one of the reasons we bring this up is within many of the industries that we serve, as regulations start changing, we know that in general, this isn't always easy to adjust to, right? I mean, as regulations are put in place, they're usually not put in place with the idea of making things easier and less stringent. They're often going to add some additional work, some additional details of what's expected from an organization. Well, that means you're also then going to have to address those in a timely manner, because there's usually time frames. So some of the tools that we're trying to provide are going to allow you to better adjust so that you know you have a secure system and a secure network as you have to start dealing with the regulatory changes that may be taking place. The other thing that gets provided is a risk scorecard. That is, it's something that tells us where we were as we started, or at least at one point in our cybersecurity process, where we are and where we hope to go. It's giving us sort of a plan and a path. And having some sort of scorecard so we can see that moving forward and the progress that's been made is important. And it's not just important to our internal organization, but it's also something that's going to be important to our company, to the stakeholders of the company, and even to partners, such as the insurance companies who are covering your enterprise from a secure cybersecurity standpoint. So having records and showing that continuous improvement within your cybersecurity is going to be an important thing to be able to have and demonstrate to all those different interested parties.
Thanks, Bill.
So, yep, there you go.
Appreciate that. And hopefully that helped the folks on the phone get a sense for what the phases of our approach is to the rapid protection for OT environments. And just a quick summary, in working with us to rapidly accelerate protection, it's about how can we rapidly provide you that baseline. So a quick inventory, as Bill mentioned, we can rapidly provide that to you in a day around the inventory of the vulnerabilities and how things are connected, which really leads us into securing the overall boundaries, which includes not only hiding the factory from the outside world, but hardening the remote access that you have today. And the purpose of those first two phases is to give us time and some breathing room that we can then plan for the budget, the people, and the time to go further with our defense in depth strategy around hardening the security, which allows us to then move into getting out in front of that cyber giant, leveraging the team that we have, and be able to become proactive. and be able to do things around network fingerprinting and finding those zero-day vulnerabilities, automatically detecting in devices and determining what the vulnerabilities are, and providing those risk scorecards and being able to look ahead and see how regulatory and being able to report back, hey, we've actually had a positive impact on reducing our vulnerabilities, and being able to have that documentation that you can go back to your cyber insurance carrier and get some of your costs of premium reduced. So I know we're running a little bit time, so what I'm going to do is actually take a couple of questions from the callers on the phone. We've been trying to come up with a few that kind of represent and I think this is one of them that I think speaks to a lot of people's questions on the phone. I'd like your help answering this one. So the first one is, yeah, I heard full network segmentation isn't necessary anymore in order to secure my environment. Are you saying that full network segmentation isn't needed?
No, and if that was any implication for me, absolutely not. Network segmentation is absolutely the best way to oversee your cybersecurity and to establishing zones and conduits as devices communicate is the best way to allow you to manage that. It's simply that we want to have and provide quick ways to help you, in essence, microsegment, so you can take care of the overall segmentation of your network. And my GrayMatter coworkers know me as kind of goofy analogies, and what I'd say is, for a large OT network, setting up effective segmentation isn't like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's a lot more like planning a dinner party for 12, right? You're going to need to do some planning, some shopping. There's things that are going to have to take place for that to be successful. And it's the same thing when you're trying to segment your OT networks.
Perfect. The second one I have is, we already have a firewall from Cisco. I don't understand how this is different. Can you explain?
So I'll assume we're talking a little bit about the secure segmentation, and the idea behind that is the segmentation we're suggesting includes encryption as well as decoupling the device from the IP address. So, and that's not to say you don't want to implement firewalls. It's just understand the idea that as you're putting in firewalls, especially as you're putting in throughout your network, that's still going to take management, auditing, and adjustments. So as that's taking place, we're just offering a solution that can help secure, cloak, and encrypt those communications while you're determining where you want to have your firewalls in place and how much in terms of resources is going to be available to address and manage those firewalls in your system.
Great, thanks, Bill. Looks like the next question we have is, we're looking into hiring a consultant to do a full vulnerability assessment of our plants. How can we utilize you?
Call Steve is the quick answer. And he'll help you.
I like that answer.
But thank you. No, what I'd say is that there's certainly no problem, and we wouldn't dissuade anyone from doing a full vulnerability assessment. What sort of we've been focusing on and talking about is providing tools that help you focus and manage your devices and your connecting and being able to put something in place that's actually providing security. I mean, there's nothing wrong with an assessment, but ultimately what you're really doing is record keeping and setting up documents to help you better implement your plans. After the assessment's complete, you still haven't actually implemented any security. So we're trying to provide some concepts and some ideas where you can implement security effectively and efficiently while still being able to continue to grow your cybersecurity process.
Thanks, Bill. And looks like we're at the bottom of the hour. If people want to hang around for another minute or two, I had some examples coming from some clients that Bill and I and the team have been working with around these two very specific problems, around trying to get a rapid baseline as well as different. So let me just share that a little bit. Is you know, we're not alone. We're all still figuring this out. This is a good methodology and a process to help us accelerate the protection. But as we continue to have conversations with our customers, you know, one of our customers came to us and said, hey, this is a lot harder than it originally looked to us. You know, they made some commitments around time and budget to get all of their factories secure. And unfortunately, as we started having the conversation, they were only a little over 20% complete in the work. They were a couple of years in, at about 2 years into the process, and they were already approaching the budget threshold that they had already committed to the organization. And it wasn't that they took a wrong step, it was the heavy lifting of trying to re-architect their OT system from the ground up, because of all of the challenges we spoke of, was really too hard. And are working with us now to figure out the next step that we can take to help accelerate their transition to a more cyber secure environment. The second one that I thought was interesting was, this was from a healthcare organization. So think about people who make pills and tablets. And what they were used to was compiling Excel spreadsheets. Literally, they said they had 12 of them per site that they would go out, they'd interview people to figure out if there's anything that's not in the Excel spreadsheet anymore. And they were saying for them, it was typically taking 6 to 8 months on an annual basis just to get that new assessment of what the inventory was that was out there. And utilizing the approach with us, what they've been telling us is it's really allowed them to free up their manpower to actually go do work. So instead of spending a lot of time just assessing where they are and getting an inventory of what's there, now they're actually spending the time to go in and do remediations and fixing, because literally we can give them that roadmap and the picture instantaneously within a day, as Bill has outlined. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. Definitely appreciate all of the questions that came in over the chat. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but I promise we'll take those questions, and you'll at least get an email or a phone call from Bill and I. And as always, please feel free to share with me what you think the next topic should be, because as we continue to have conversations with you and other folks in the field, you're not alone. We're all trying to figure this out together. We're all facing very similar challenges, and we really want to take this as a forum for us to share best practices and share with you what we're seeing and what other companies are doing successfully to empower their people and fight that cyber giant. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend, and talk to you soon.